right here in Minnesota as federal authorities investigate allegations now of widespread fraud. Today it was several daycare centers.
There is a growing number of Minnesota daycares disputing allegations of fraud and empty buildings at their centers.
Now this comes as a state officials visit daycares that were featured in a now viral video to ensure that there are actually children attending.
Because of alleged fraud in Minnesota, some businesses are now facing intense backlash on social media and reportedly seeing fewer customers in their stores. It was 9:12 a.m. in Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Morning traffic crawled along a busy suburban commercial strip. To anyone passing by, the single-story brick building on the corner appeared to be an ordinary childcare center. Bright alphabet decorations covered the windows, and a quiet playground waited behind the building. The sign above the entrance read Creative Minds Daycare, but within moments, that calm scene was shattered. A convoy of unmarked federal SUVs flooded the parking lot. Agents from the FBI, ICE, and the Department of Health and Human Services moved with coordinated precision. They weren't there for a routine inspection. They were executing a federal search warrant. Intelligence analysts had identified the facility as a suspected ghost daycare, a business allegedly collecting millions in government subsidies while serving few or no children at all. And this wasn't an isolated operation. At that exact moment, federal teams were simultaneously raiding 23 locations across the Twin Cities metropolitan area. The target was a network of Somali-owned daycare centers suspected of defrauding taxpayers on a massive scale. When agents entered Creative Minds Daycare, they expected to find dozens of children, teachers, and the noise typical of a facility licensed to care for 99 kids. Instead, they found silence. The classrooms were empty as toys sat untouched beneath a thin layer of dust. Cribs appeared unused, no children were present, no parents were dropping off their kids. Only a small group of employees remained, seemingly shocked to see federal agents instead of another uneventful day. Investigators later discovered that this facility alone had received approximately $2.45 million in government subsidies during the previous year. But the alleged fraud didn't end there. According to investigators, the daycare had effectively been shut down months earlier due to regulatory concerns. Yet the billing never stopped. Operators allegedly covered the old sign with a new banner and rebranded the facility under a different name, Super Kids Daycare. The state payments continued. On paper, children kept attending every day. In reality, investigators suspected many of those children never existed. As agents secured the building, the facility manager reportedly offered an explanation for missing records. According to investigators, he claimed that just one day after federal officials requested attendance logs and documentation, burglars had broken into the building. But these burglars were unusual. They allegedly ignored computers, electronics, cash, and valuable merchandise. Instead, the manager claimed they smashed through a wall connecting the daycare to a neighboring Family Dollar store and stole only one thing: the paperwork, attendance records, enrollment forms, employee files, the very documents investigators were seeking. Federal agents reportedly viewed the story with skepticism. To them, it appeared less like a burglary and more like a desperate attempt to explain away missing evidence. But the daycare raids were only the beginning. As federal analysts examined records seized during the operation, another disturbing pattern emerged. The fraud appeared to extend far beyond childcare centers. Investigators noticed an unusual concentration of assisted living facilities in Brooklyn Park. The city has roughly 84,000 residents, yet it reportedly contained 181 registered assisted living facilities. For comparison, nearby St. Paul, with nearly 310,000 residents, had only 83. The numbers raised immediate questions. Why would a much smaller suburb have more than twice as many care facilities as a major city? Federal investigators suspected the answer wasn't a healthcare boom, it was fraud. Agents began inspecting residential properties that were billing the state millions of dollars annually for specialized care services. Many of these locations were ordinary single-family homes. One property allegedly linked to the investigation belonged to Gandhi Muhammad, also known as Gandhi Abdikadai. His name had already surfaced in connection with the notorious Feeding Our Future case, one of the largest pandemic-related fraud investigations in American history.
A lot of the journalism that's been going on the last couple of days has been really dishonest. I don't want to point fingers at anybody, but I do feel like what was done was someone came to our building outside of operating hours. When there's a specific sign on our door that says our days and our hours, he came outside of those hours and then claimed, hey, they're closed, and they're still making money.
According to investigators, despite facing federal charges in that case, businesses connected to his family continued receiving state funds. In one instance, officials alleged that his wife was listed as the administrator of an assisted living operation, still collecting government payments. Federal records suggested that this network of facilities had received approximately $2.3 million in public funding during the previous year alone. Since 2016, investigators estimated that nearly $49 million had flowed through the operation. Journalists and investigators investigators who visited some of these locations reported a troubling pattern. Residents often seemed unaware that their homes were officially registered as healthcare facilities billing the government for intensive services. Many appeared to be little more than props in a system allegedly designed to siphon taxpayer money. The investigation eventually expanded into pandemic relief programs. Federal auditors reportedly identified thousands of potentially fraudulent PPP and EIDL loans connected to businesses that appeared to exist only on paper. The estimated value of these loans exceeded $400 million. Funds intended to help legitimate businesses survive the COVID-19 crisis were allegedly diverted into luxury purchases, overseas investments, and elaborate financial networks. Investigators began noticing clusters of suspicious applications originating from the same neighborhoods and zip codes. The pattern suggested something larger than isolated fraud. It suggested organized fraud as application mills and consultants, networks designed to mass produce government funding requests in exchange for kickbacks. According to investigators, the fraud had become industrialized. As federal authorities dug deeper, they concluded that Minnesota was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Officials briefed on the investigation reportedly estimated that interconnected fraud schemes involving childcare programs, food assistance programs, and healthcare services could collectively involve as much as $18 billion nationwide. To put that number into perspective, $18 billion could fund major infrastructure projects, veteran support programs, or countless public services. Instead, investigators alleged that much of the money disappeared into shell companies and international transfers. The problem wasn't confined to Minnesota. In Washington state, investigators examined a childcare provider called Aisha Home Child Care. Records indicated the facility had received hundreds of thousands of dollars in public funding despite having a licensed capacity of only 12 children. When investigators visited, they reportedly found a facility that appeared staged for inspections rather than actively serving children. The deeper investigators looked, the more examples they uncovered, yet perhaps the most revealing evidence wasn't what they found, it was what they didn't find. If dozens of daycare centers serving thousands of children suddenly shut down, one would expect chaos. Parents would flood government offices with complaints. Social media would erupt with outrage and communities would demand answers. But investigators reported hearing very little. No large protests, no crowds of angry parents, no overwhelming demand for replacement childcare. For critics, the silence raised an obvious question. Were many of these children ever there in the first place? The political fallout was immediate. Critics accused state officials of creating systems vulnerable to abuse. They argued that in the rush to distribute public funds quickly, oversight mechanisms had been weakened or ignored. Supporters of state programs countered that fraud exists in many systems and should not be used to undermine legitimate services relied upon by thousands of families. Regardless of political perspective, investigators argued that the alleged fraud exposed major weaknesses in oversight and accountability. The alleged scams weren't highly sophisticated cybercrimes, and many appeared surprisingly simple. Empty buildings, fake attendance records, rebranded businesses, questionable paperwork, yet they allegedly succeeded because few people were paying attention. Now federal investigators are paying attention, the raids have begun, the records are being examined, and the question facing Minnesota, and potentially the nation, is no longer just who stole the money, it's how the system allowed it to happen for so long.